Now, we do have that quick 45-second soundbite from President Trump speaking on Air Force One to reporters. Let's share it with you now.
Based on what you've been told, what do you think happened to Savannah Guthrie's mom, Nancy?
Boy, it's so crazy. It's so bad. I didn't like when they were talking about going after the pacemaker and you know, before they even started going after it, they're coming and reporting it. So if in fact they could do it that way, the person would say, well, I'm not going to let that happen, right? So bad things would happen if he did not going to let that happen. I can't imagine why they would have done that. And just in terms of strategy, just one little piece, I don't know, but we have to start reporting on other subjects also and see what happens. It's a very sad situation.
And with Iran,
All right, so we do continue to discuss this. Bringing in Chuck Marino now. He is a former Homeland Security Department advisor and former Secret Service special agent. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning to join us here, Chuck. We do appreciate it.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Well, let's start with this. Now in week 3 of the search for Nancy Guthrie, when a case goes on this long without any leads on a suspect, besides that surveillance footage that was released maybe about a week or so at this point now, what does that typically indicate to you about what next steps would be to move closer to finding an answer?
Well, most investigations come with highs and lows. And the highs are you think you find a key piece of evidence, and the lows obviously is you ultimately don't find a connection or it leads you to the wrong suspect. What I can tell you now is that these cases, these types of cases, the sooner they are resolved, these kidnap for ransoms, the better outcomes for both the victim and the victim's family and law enforcement in terms of identifying and apprehending those responsible for it. So the level of frustration is to be expected now in the 3rd week of this case. One thing that, of course, is very frustrating, and I think you heard President Trump talking about it, is that it does not appear that the FBI and the local sheriff are still on the same page. You've got one agency, the FBI, remaining quiet about investigative techniques, and then you've got the sheriff giving multiple interviews talking about all of that.
Right. And just to recap for some of our viewers, authorities say the DNA from a glove found near the home and inside the residence did not match anyone in the FBI database. How does that impact the investigation in terms of making it more difficult to determine who this person might be besides, as I said earlier, this footage that we have seen of the suspect, that doorbell footage? That's really the only lead we have right now, right?
Well, right now, yes, no match within the FBI's own database, the CODIS database. And as we've seen in varying portions of this investigation, you'll start to see private companies become more involved. For example, you saw the reports that some of the items that the suspect on video is wearing may have come from Walmart. That now requires law enforcement to engage with the Walmart team. That now involves subpoenas and search warrants and requests for video evidence and tracking items that may or may not have been sold in the area recently. Same thing here with the DNA. You'll now start to see the government, the FBI primarily, start to deal with these private genealogy companies, ancestries, for example, to see what they can come up with on the DNA side and hopefully get a hit from their databases.
And before we dive into that, because I do want to discuss that with you, just going back to what we were previously talking about, does no match suggest this person has no criminal record, or does that mean something else?
Well, from the start, it means that the individual has not come into contact with a federal, state, or local law enforcement agency, with this caveat, that the last time they came and interacted with law enforcement was when law enforcement started taking DNA from suspects. That was not always the case. That's not always been the case for eternity. So if somebody, for example, was arrested back in the late 80s, early 90s, there may not have been a DNA swab taken and entered into the CODIS database. So it either means we're truly dealing with somebody with no criminal record and hasn't interacted with law enforcement, or somebody who may have predated the DNA sampling.
Right, and as they're now switching to this genetic genealogy, we do know that this has been used in cases like the Golden State Killer investigation, also with Brian Kohberger. So now that authorities have transitioned to using that technique, that tactic, how quickly is that going to get us to potentially some more answers?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not uncommon in an investigation to have to deal with private third parties to get information, be it a phone company or a computer company when we're tracking down internet protocol addresses, for example, like I'm sure investigators are trying to do with these ransom notes that are being emailed that have not been confirmed yet by anyone as being valid. Same thing with these other technologies. You're going to see all of these technologies try and be exploited and leveraged by investigators. So it's a fairly quick process. It's an exchange of paperwork. The general counsels of these private companies are going to want to see subpoenas, are going to want to see requests for search warrants, and federal investigators have absolutely no problem supplying that type of information signed by a judge.
Are you able to dive just a little bit deeper for us? Because I'm curious myself how what they are doing now with this genetic genealogy testing, how is that different from what we've been seeing previously in this investigation? How does it all work?
Well, this really ultimately would be the key identifier in terms of a suspect. And really, as opposed to just having right now a video and some stills of somebody who's very well concealed and thought through very carefully what they were going to wear while they were committing this crime to not be discovered, the DNA really here is the golden ticket. So I can imagine that it is really a full force of efforts right now, especially from the FBI, not only working with their own internal lab, but we know the sheriff's department uses an external lab. The FBI now still has to work with that external lab in terms of processing the evidence that the sheriff's department put in. So it's still a fragmented case from an evidence standpoint. But the FBI will look to leverage and match that DNA as quickly as possible. And again, it is possible that none of the suspect's DNA may have been left on the scene or discovered near the scene.
And Chuck, before we dive a little bit deeper into what we've previously seen in this case here, I do want to circle back to what President Trump said aboard Air Force One. He wasn't happy that this information has been shared with the media. And you touched on this a little bit here, but could you share for our viewers why he may have not been too happy about that? Could that really compromise the investigation?
Well, I think you see the president take the same approach when he's talking about the military and the potential use of technologies by the Department of War. These are things that should not be spoken about. The bad guys, the bad folks, the adversaries don't need to know every tool we have in the toolbox, whether it's as the United States military or whether it's as United States law enforcement. And in this case, I was always taught under the assumption that less is more. That means keep your mouth shut. Don't discuss everything that you've got going on in the investigation, and don't talk about all the investigative techniques and technologies that you have at your disposal. Nobody needs to know this in the public. Nobody is going to come through. It benefits nobody to know that there is some type of electronic technology being used to try and detect the pacemaker of Nancy Guthrie. That has no impact on us. That's not going to increase tips. It's not going to bring forth a witness. This is just something that they're looking to use to pinpoint the location of Nancy Guthrie. So this should go on behind the curtain and nobody should know about this.
And we haven't had a whole lot of press conferences from Sheriff Nanos there, although he has been speaking to media. We had him on our show just yesterday with my colleague Josh Breslow. But we have had information slowly coming out on this. And I want to talk about the latest here. An Arizona gun store owner says the FBI asked him to review recent firearm purchases tied to nearly 24 individuals. What does that tell you in regards to where the investigators' heads are at right now?
Yeah, so this is a natural progression. It actually, I think, would have happened a lot faster had the FBI been asked to come in a lot sooner. Something else that will be looked at when this investigation is concluded, because I don't think that the close working relationship was there from the very start. And that's been to the detriment of this investigation. So now what you're seeing is you're seeing federal authorities take the lead in canvassing the area, and not just the immediate area. But that canvas also includes locations like the Walmart I discussed, local gun shops that may have made recent sales of firearms to individuals that had never been in there before, or may not have been from the area. So there's a lot of reasons not just to talk to neighbors, but also to talk to businesses, especially businesses that may have sold items used in the commission of this crime.
Chuck, before I let you go here, we do know that the reward now at $200,000. That's thanks in part to an anonymous donation. I would imagine that that would lead to even more tips coming in, even though thousands have already been received. I have to wonder, how are they working through those tips to really follow the ones that they think are the most credible?
Yeah, they're literally handling it as an ER triage center. If you can imagine. They've got investigative teams and analysts from the FBI, from the sheriff's office, that are taking in all of these tips. And very quickly, they have to triage. What is the likelihood, the credibility, the appropriateness, and the realistic possibilities of these tips panning out? Does somebody have a relationship to a potential suspect that they're naming? May they have access to a key piece of evidence or a key piece of information? So investigators don't want to push everything aside in haste, but they certainly want to keep the number down as quickly as they can to keep only those tips that seem credible and actionable in the pile to be followed up on.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that analogy there. Chuck, before I let you go, is there anything else that you'd like to add about this? I know there is so much information that has come out recently as this does continue. As you can see on the bottom of the screen, day 20, this is continuing into.
Yeah, now look, horrific situation for the family, horrific for the community. And I imagine there's a lot of frustrations outside and inside law enforcement regarding this investigation. I don't think this case on the part of the suspect or suspects was ever about money. That may have been an initial deviation to throw investigators off track. I don't think it's about the money. I think this was, unfortunately, a targeted attack based on association of Nancy Guthrie to her daughter, Savannah. And this became a target of opportunity and nothing more.
All right, and we are awaiting details here from the Pima County Sheriff's Office to see if another press conference will be held at some point. Chuck, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.